Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Have you ever felt this unsettling feeling that there are these forces at work that are trying to deliberately undermine the very foundations of American democracy?
Yeah,
Scary thought, right?
it is.
And that's exactly what Katherine Stewart dives into in her book Money, Lying, and God. We'll be doing a deep dive into this book today to kind of uncover the intricate workings of this anti-democratic movement in America. You can find a link to the book on Amazon in the description.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful deep dives like this one.
What strikes me about Stewart's book is that it reads like a political thriller. She doesn't just present this dry analysis of the situation. She takes us on this journey, peeling back the layers of this movement, exposing the motivations and strategies of those involved. It's a real page-turner.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Stewart identifies four key players in this movement:
Okay.
funders, thinkers, power players, and the infantry. Now, I'm curious, when you first delved into these categories, what stood out to you the most?
For me, it was the story of John Eastman that really drove home the point. He starts off as this seemingly unassuming academic, but ends up deeply entangled in Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And this really highlights the fact that we're not just talking about a fringe group of extremists here. This movement has its tentacles in positions of power and influence.
That's a chilling thought, isn't it?
It is.
Makes you wonder who else is out there kind of operating under the radar. But let's talk about the funders for a moment. Stewart really shines a light on the money trail here, showing how wealthy individuals and foundations are bankrolling this entire operation. It's almost like they're playing this high-stakes game, betting on a future that looks very different from the America we know.
And it's not just about pushing a particular political agenda. They're aiming to fundamentally reshape the fabric of American society. We see this clearly in their efforts to dismantle public education, a cornerstone of any functioning democracy. There's a chilling anecdote in the book about Peter Bollinger, a wealthy donor, who explicitly stated that his goal was taking down the education system. What do you make of that statement?
Well, it's certainly a bold statement and one that should make us pause and consider the implications. If education is the bedrock of an informed citizenry, then dismantling it would essentially cripple a society's ability to critically engage with the world around them,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't it?
Precisely. And this is where the role of Christian nationalism comes into play. This ideology, which seeks to merge religious beliefs with political goals, is a powerful driving force behind this movement.
And this brings us to their relentless attacks on public education. Stewart goes into detail about their tactics, which range from promoting school vouchers in charter schools to advocating for homeschooling, often with the underlying goal of instilling a specific religious worldview.
Yes, and their tactics are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Take Moms for Liberty, for example. On the surface, they appear to be a grassroots movement of concerned parents, but beneath that veneer lies a well-funded operation with ties to major right-wing organizations.
Right.
Their objective goes far beyond simple parental involvement. They aim to dismantle public education as we know it.
Stewart even shares a story about Erica Donalds, a leader within Moms for Liberty, invoking God's blessing on their mission to expose the supposed truth about public education. It's a stark reminder that this movement is deeply entwined with religious fervor and a belief that they're on a divinely ordained mission.
And this us versus them mentality is further amplified in their relentless crusade against what they label woke ideology.
You're right, it's become this catch-all term they use to demonize anything remotely progressive or left-leaning, allowing them to dismiss a wide range of ideas and movements without actually engaging in any meaningful debate.
Exactly. They've managed to turn woke into this bogeyman that represents everything they perceive as a threat to their values. It's a brilliant, albeit insidious, strategy.
Christopher Rufo, a key figure in this movement, even admitted that their goal was to strategically weaponize the term critical race theory, to stoke fear and outrage, even though it's not actually being taught in most K-12 schools.
Right.
It's about manufacturing a crisis, isn't it?
Absolutely. They're trying to create this sense of panic, a feeling that traditional values are under attack, and that only they can save America from the clutches of these so-called woke forces.
Right.
It's a tactic designed to consolidate power and silence dissenting voices.
And what's even more alarming is that this isn't just an American phenomenon. Stewart discusses how this movement has international connections and is actively working to export its ideology and tactics abroad.
The World Congress of Families is a perfect example of this. It's an organization that acts as a bridge between American Christian nationalists and illiberal leaders in other parts of the world, such as Viktor Orban in Hungary. They're sharing strategies, resources, and ultimately building a global network of anti-democratic actors.
It's rather unsettling when you think about the potential implications of such collaborations.
Very much so.
It paints a rather bleak picture, doesn't it?
Hmm.
A global network of individuals and organizations actively working to undermine democratic principles. But let's shift our focus for a moment to the role of elite resentment in fueling this movement. Stewart suggests it's not simply about economic anxieties or cultural grievances. There's a deeper sense of entitlement at play, a belief that a certain group has a God-given right to rule.
Yes, and this resentment is particularly palpable among the intellectuals within this movement. Stewart examines the Claremont Institute, a conservative think tank, and how its scholars have gone from advocating for intellectual rigor to embracing extremist and anti-democratic viewpoints.
Right.
They see themselves as guardians of a higher truth, a truth that transcends the complexities of democratic governance.
That's a dangerous path to tread, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Elevating one's personal beliefs above the principles of a system designed to ensure balance and representation. So we've laid out the key players and some of their tactics. Now the question is, what can we do about it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Stewart argues that the first step is recognizing the severity of the threat. We can't afford to dismiss this as just another political squabble. This is a battle for the soul of American democracy.
And she emphasizes the need for strategic funding of pro-democracy initiatives. It's not enough to be outraged. We need to actively support organizations and individuals working to defend our democratic institutions and values. But it's also about education, isn't it? Equipping ourselves and others with the tools to critically evaluate the information we're bombarded with.
Absolutely. Media literacy is crucial in this age of disinformation. We need to be able to identify and debunk the lies and propaganda that fuel this movement. It's about reclaiming the truth and empowering people to think for themselves.
Right.
It's about fostering critical thinking skills so we don't fall prey to manipulative tactics.
It's a daunting task, for sure, but one we can't afford to ignore. This deep dive has been eye-opening and, frankly, a bit unsettling. It's made me realize just how fragile our democracy really is. How about you? What are your thoughts?
I agree. It's a sobering reminder that democracy is not a spectator sport. It demands our active participation, a willingness to defend its principles, and a commitment to truth and justice.
Well said. Now, this movement doesn't just involve the masterminds and the funders. There are also the foot soldiers, the individuals who show up at school board meetings, protests, and rallies. What can you tell us about them? What motivates them to join this fight?
Stewart refers to them as the infantry, and she argues that understanding their motivations is key to effectively countering this movement. You know, it's tempting to just dismiss them as ignorant or bigoted, but that's a simplistic and ultimately unproductive approach. We need to recognize that many of these individuals are driven by genuine fears and anxieties.
Fears that are often exploited by those in positions of power.
Precisely. These are people who feel like they've lost control, that their values are being eroded, and that their way of life is under attack. They're searching for someone to blame, someone to fight for them, and the leaders of this movement offer them a convenient scapegoat: the woke elite, the liberals, the secular humanists, anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of what it means to be in America.
It's like they're creating this siege mentality, a sense that they're constantly under attack and must be prepared to defend themselves by any means necessary.
And that's what makes this movement so dangerous. It's not just about winning elections, it's about delegitimizing the entire democratic process. It's about fostering a climate of fear and distrust where violence and intimidation become acceptable tools of political engagement.
And we've already witnessed glimpses of that, haven't we? The January 6th insurrection was a stark wake-up call for many, a chilling reminder that this rhetoric can have very real and devastating consequences.
Yeah.
It's not just a war of words. It can escalate into actual physical violence.
Absolutely. And it's not just about physical violence. It's also about the erosion of democratic norms, the undermining of institutions, the spread of disinformation and conspiracy theories. It's about creating a society where truth and facts no longer matter, where power is the only currency that holds any value.
It's a bleak picture, but one we need to confront if we want to safeguard our democracy. Stewart doesn't offer any easy solutions, but she stresses the importance of actively defending democratic values and institutions.
And that means being willing to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. It means engaging in difficult conversations, challenging misinformation, and holding those in power accountable for their actions.
It also means recognizing that we're all in this together. This isn't a battle between Democrats and Republicans. It's a battle between those who believe in democracy and those who don't. We need to build a broad coalition of people from all walks of life who are willing to fight for the future of our country.
And that includes acknowledging the role that religion plays in this movement. We can't shy away from discussing Christian nationalism just because it's uncomfortable. We need to understand how it's being used to justify anti-democratic aims, and we need to challenge those who are exploiting faith for political gain.
It's about reclaiming the true meaning of faith, a faith rooted in love, compassion, and justice, not hate, fear, and division. One thing that struck me in Stewart's book is how she connects the dots between different aspects of this movement. For example, she discusses how the anti-woke crusade is being used to attack not just public education, but also universities, corporations, and even the military.
It's about purging any institution they perceive as a threat to their worldview. They see woke ideology as a cancer that needs to be eradicated, and they're willing to use any means necessary to achieve that goal. It's a very black and white perspective, devoid of nuance and understanding.
And they're becoming increasingly creative in their tactics. Stewart highlights how they're using seemingly innocuous terms like parental rights and religious freedom to mask their true agenda. It's a clever way to appeal to a broader audience, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's a classic example of weaponizing language to make their agenda more palatable. They know that most people support parental involvement in education and the right to religious expression, so they leverage these ideas as a Trojan horse to advance their much more radical agenda.
It's like a bait and switch. They start with a seemingly reasonable premise, but then they twist it to justify their attacks on democratic norms and institutions. It's a deceptive tactic designed to lure people in with familiar concepts before revealing their true intentions.
And it's a tactic that's proving to be quite effective. They've successfully framed the debate on their terms and convinced a significant portion of the population that they are the victims, that their rights are under attack. It's a powerful narrative, especially when amplified by a sophisticated media ecosystem that reinforces their worldview and demonizes their opponents.
You're right, they've built a closed-loop information system where their followers are constantly bombarded with messages that confirm their biases and stoke their fears. It's extremely difficult to penetrate that echo chamber and engage in meaningful dialogue. It's like trying to have a rational conversation in the midst of a hurricane.
Exactly, and that's precisely why it's so crucial to support organizations that are actively combating disinformation and promoting media literacy. We need to equip people with the critical thinking skills necessary to navigate this increasingly complex information landscape. We need to help them discern fact from fiction, truth from fabrication.
We also need to be willing to challenge those who are spreading these lies and conspiracy theories, even if it means having uncomfortable conversations with friends and family members.
You're absolutely right. It's not about silencing dissenting voices. It's about defending the truth and protecting our democracy from those who seek to undermine it. We need to be vigilant in our pursuit of truth and unwavering in our defense of democratic principles.
Stewart's book also highlights the role resentment plays in this movement, and it's not just the resentment of the working class who feel left behind by globalization and economic change. There's another layer to this, isn't there?
Yes, she also discusses the resentment harbored by a certain segment of the elite. Those who feel they've been denied their rightful place in society, those who believe they should be the ones in control, they see themselves as the rightful heirs to power, and anyone who challenges their authority is seen as a usurper.
And they're leveraging their wealth and influence to reshape America in their image.
The Claremont Institute is a prime example of this. They've transformed from a respected conservative think tank into a breeding ground for extremist and anti-democratic ideas. And they have the ear of some very powerful people in Washington. Their influence extends far beyond the walls of their institute.
Stewart argues that this elite resentment is just as dangerous, if not more so, than the resentment of the working class. Because these elites possess the resources and connections to turn their vision into reality. They have the means to enact their agenda on a grand scale.
And their vision is a deeply troubling one. They yearn for a return to a mythical past, a time when America was supposedly great, a time when white Christian men were firmly in control. They're willing to sacrifice the principles of democracy and equality to achieve that goal. It's a regressive ideology that seeks to turn back the clock on progress and reestablish a hierarchy based on exclusion and privilege.
It's a chilling reminder that the threat to democracy can come from the top down as well as from the bottom up. It's a threat we need to take very seriously. We need to be aware of the dangers on multiple fronts and be prepared to defend our democracy from all angles.
We can't afford to be complacent. We need to be vigilant in defending our democratic institutions and values, and we need to be willing to fight back against those who are trying to dismantle our democracy. This fight requires unwavering commitment, persistent action, and a refusal to accept anything less than a just and equitable society for all.
It's a fight we cannot afford to lose. The stakes are simply too high. This has been a very sobering conversation, but an incredibly important one. Perhaps we should take a moment to process all of this before we delve into potential solutions and strategies for moving forward.
I agree. This is a lot to unpack. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've discussed and gather our thoughts before we explore potential paths forward.
We've painted a pretty bleak picture so far, haven't we? It's a lot to digest, but we can't just wallow in despair. So what are some practical steps we can take as individuals to counter this anti-democratic movement? What can we do to push back against these forces that seem so determined to reshape our nation?
While Stewart's book does offer some glimmers of hope amidst the darkness, she emphasizes the importance of targeting the financial machinery that fuels this movement.
So hitting them where it hurts, where wallets, cutting off the flow of money that keeps this machine running.
Exactly. We need to be aware of who's funding these organizations and apply pressure to stop them from bankrolling this assault on democracy, follow the money trail, and expose the financial backers who are enabling this movement.
That sounds like a good starting point, but what about the everyday disinformation, the constant stream of misinformation circulating on social media and even seeping into mainstream news? How do we combat that?
That's where media literacy comes in. We need to hone our critical thinking skills, learn to identify fake news and propaganda, and most importantly, we need to teach these skills to others, especially young people who are growing up in this digital age.
It's like we need to inoculate ourselves against the virus of disinformation. We need to build up our immunity to these manipulative tactics and protect ourselves from falling prey to their deceptive strategies.
I like that analogy. And it's not just about being defensive. We need to be proactive in promoting accurate information and supporting credible news sources.
That's easier said than done in this age of information overload where we're constantly bombarded with messages from all directions. But I see your point. It's about being more discerning consumers of information, not just possibly accepting whatever pops up on our screens. We need to be critical thinkers, actively questioning the information we're consuming and seeking out reliable sources.
Right. And it's about engaging in those difficult conversations with people who are buying into these anti-democratic narratives. It can be frustrating, but it's important to try to understand where they're coming from and to challenge their assumptions with facts and evidence.
It's not about winning an argument or proving someone wrong. It's about planting seeds of doubt, helping them to see the cracks in the narrative they've been fed. It's about encouraging critical thinking and helping them to break free from the echo chamber they might be trapped in.
And sometimes it's simply about listening, really hearing their concerns and anxieties, because often those feelings are rooted in legitimate issues like economic inequality or a sense of cultural displacement.
Which the anti-democratic movement then exploits, offering simplistic solutions and scapegoats that prey on those anxieties.
Exactly. So part of the solution also involves addressing those underlying issues. We need to create a more just and equitable society, one where everyone feels like they have a stake in the system and where their voices are heard and valued.
That sounds like a huge undertaking, but I guess it goes back to that idea of democracy being a constant work in progress, right? It's an ongoing process of striving for a more perfect union, knowing that perfection might be unattainable, but the pursuit of it is what makes democracy so vital.
Absolutely. And it's not just about grand political solutions. It's about the everyday choices we make, the way we treat each other, the way we engage in our communities.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, that our individual actions have an impact on the larger social fabric. It's about understanding that we're all part of this grand experiment called democracy, and our individual actions contribute to its success or failure.
Right. And it's about remembering that democracy is fragile. It requires our constant vigilance and engagement to protect it from those who would seek to undermine it. We can't afford to be passive observers. We need to be active participants in shaping the future of our nation.
Well, this deep dive into money, lies, and God has been both eye-opening and, honestly, a bit unsettling. But I think it's also been empowering in a way. It's giving me a better understanding of the forces at play and some concrete ideas about how to resist them.
I agree. It's a reminder that even though the challenges are great, we're not powerless. We can make a difference if we choose to act, if we choose to engage, if we choose to stand up for the values we hold dear.
And we have to. The stakes are simply too high to remain silent or passive. So, listeners, what resonated most with you in this deep dive? What are your thoughts on countering this anti-democratic movement? Share your insights in the comments, and let's keep this conversation going.
Yes, let's hear your thoughts. What actions will you take to safeguard our democracy? What steps will you take to protect the values that underpin our society?
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.